We're ready to start for tonight, and special announcement right now is that this year is the 35th year that there is going to be a Bible quiz. And that Bible quiz is going to be held December 12th at 1 p.m. in the community engagement venue that's just right outside this room. It is for high school kids, grades 9 through 12. There are scholarship prizes, and also those prizes can be used for trips to Israel, assuming that they are not going just to Tel Aviv to lay out on the beach, that they have to be an educational type of trip. And the top prize is $1,000, second prize $750, third prize $500, and fourth prize is $250. So that's just, not only are the kids welcome to come, but parents are welcome to come as well. And according to Steve Reikus, that's been a growing event for the last several years. So you're sure encouraged to come. There you go.
Oh, great. Thank you, Mark. Good evening, everyone. It's great to see you all here and to be here with you for our study. Tonight, we are doing a session about anti-Semitism and in kind of historical context and in the present day. I know that we've already had one session on this topic, and as you know, the Beit Midrash has been scheduled this year. We have a certain set of topics that we're looking at, and then they're kind of addressed at several times over the course of the year. So I think this is our second session on the topic of anti-Semitism. And so I'm Rabbi Stoller from Brian Stoller from Temple Israel, and Rabbi Eli Tenenbaum from Chabad. And we're going to be kind of talking about our thoughts on the topic tonight. And we as always, I want to just emphasize, we want this to be a dialogue and invite your questions. So each of us is going to kind of start off. Rabbi Tenenbaum is going to start, then and I'll go, and we'll just kind of present an introduction to our various perspectives, and then invite comments. So Rabbi Tenenbaum.
All right. So first of all, I hope everybody had a wonderful Hanukkah. I, for one, did. So I hope everyone else, like me, had a great Hanukkah and a lot of fun, and enjoyed the festivities. To the topic of anti-Semitism, historically and today. So that's an interesting composition, I guess, an interesting juxtaposition, I would say. Because in a lot of ways, anti-Semitism today is very similar to what it was throughout history, and in certain ways, it's different. So let's just talk about for a moment where anti-Semitism comes from, what it's all about, and really, if you take a look back, it started all the way from the beginning. There's actually a statement of the Talmud that says, "Halacha Esav sona liYaakov." There's a fact of life that is as valid and as strong as a Jewish halachic ruling, as a Jewish law, that Esav, the brother of Yaakov, what would be called the father of the nations, of the other nations, of the Gentile nations, will hate Yaakov. In other words, that the non-Jews and the anti-Semites will hate the Jews. It's a fact. It's a fact that we have to live with, but it's something there. Where it comes from, if you look at the sages, and I think Rabbi Stoller was going to discuss a little bit about the story of Purim, but if you look in that story, there's actually an amazing analogy. I'm not sure if you're going to cover this story about the mound and the ditch.
No.
So there's a midrash that describes a very interesting story between the king at the time, Ahasuerus, and Haman, the famous Haman. And the way the Talmud describes the story is that, and we're talking about the part of the story of the miracle of Purim, where Haman goes to Ahasuerus and says, "I know you have a problem. We have a problem with the Jews. I'd like to kill all of them, and I'll even pay you 10,000 silver coins to wipe them out, to get your permission." And Ahasuerus' response is, "Keep your money. I don't need your money. Hold on to it. I don't need it. And do with the Jews what you'd like," which is a very fascinating interaction between Haman and Ahasuerus. And the Midrash on this story tells us, it's the analogy that's given is that there are two people, neighboring fields, neighboring farms. And one of them has a ditch, and one of them has a mound. And the guy with the ditch goes over to the guy with the mound and says, "Please, I'll pay you for the extra dirt that you have, the extra mound dirt you have, and I'll be able to put it into my ditch and fill it up, and that way we can both evenly have our spaces flat. And the man with the mound says, you know what, don't pay me for it. I don't need you to pay me for it. As long as you get the mound out of here, I don't need the mound either. Let's get rid of it. And this is the analogy between Achashverosh and Haman. And really, it seems to be a little odd because if you take Achashverosh, obviously has a mound, as the Jewish people, that he seems unnecessary. But what was the void that Haman had? Haman didn't really have a void. We're talking about Haman having a void and offering to pay for it. And Achashverosh says, don't worry, you don't have to pay for it. And the simple and only understanding that you can have of it is that the Jewish people, being who we are, that we follow the Torah and we follow God's will and commandments and we do what we're supposed to be doing, that causes people like Haman to have a void in them. They feel inadequate. They don't feel as good as they should be because they're not doing what they can. So there's obviously many ways for them to fill the void, either by doing good things or get rid of the Jews. So that's kind of the core where anti-Semitism might come from, is where people look at Jews and say, you are the chosen people. You're the people that were chosen by God. And you have a responsibility. That kind of makes me feel uncomfortable. So I'm not going to like you. I want to get rid of you. That's kind of where the perspective of anti-Semitism might come from. Now, obviously, it doesn't mean that we should stop fulfilling our mission, because it's not about whether or not we fulfill our mission. It's the fact that we have the mission. The fact that we have that mission causes anti-Semitism, no matter what you can do. And it's going to be a fact of life. So there are many ways to handle it. There are many things that we can do about it. Today, anti-Semitism might be kind of packaged in anti-Israel sentiment. Many times it is. You can see it definitely throughout the world, especially in some of the nations and some of the parts of the world where that's kind of a nice excuse for them, is to take anti-Israel, anti-Zionist sentiment and call it, and really it's anti-Semitism. But the real truth is that there's several ways, and I think just to synopsize what our easiest approach kind of to anti-Semitism would be to look back at our forefather Jacob. When he meets Esau for the first time after the entire story where he, quote unquote, took away the blessings, and back a couple of Torah readings ago, which we just read recently, and he comes back to meet him in the portion of Vayishlach, and he hears that Esau is coming back to attack him with 400 soldiers, that they're going to wipe out the Jewish people, which was the fledgling Jewish people at the time. And Yaakov's response is a threefold response. Number one, and first and foremost, was prayer to God. He prayed. He asked God, please, you promised that I would survive. You promised that I would thrive. You promised my nation would become the Jewish people that would to be as many as the stars and sand. This is what you promised me. Please, let's hold your promise. And he prayed to God. He put his faith into God. But he didn't just leave it at that. He also tried diplomacy. Classic diplomacy. He sent gifts to Esau. He sent gifts to his brother. He sent, as the Torah describes what he sent, a vast amount of livestock and other things. He sent it to him. And point number three was he prepared for war. He prepared to fight back if that's what it would come to, if the diplomacy wouldn't work. And if the prayers to God, God says, listen, you're on your own at this point, not on your own, God forbid. God doesn't leave us on our own. But God says that your job today is to fight. Then Jacob was ready to fight. And I think that's our approach as well today. We try diplomacy. We pray first. We first put our trust into God. We ask God to help us. And at that point, we split our efforts into two. It's diplomacy, not putting too much faith into diplomacy at the end of the day. You have to understand that at the end of the day, the people that were asking for diplomacy might be anti-Semitic themselves. We don't know who we're talking about. And on the other side of it, you prepare for fighting. But the biggest thing is that Yaakov didn't look for the fight. He didn't look for anti-Semitism where it may not be found. When Esau was coming with 400 men, that's when he set up his system. We don't have to focus on anti-Semitism every single minute, every single day. It's not something that we have to live with every single moment. When anti-Semitism rears its ugly head, which unfortunately it does from time to time, that's when we have to deal with it and do our due diligence. But to constantly, every moment, wake up and worry about who's about to attack me and who's about to kill me and who hates me, there's no need for that. That's a waste of our energies. Our energies are much, much better placed doing good things, lighting Hanukkah menorahs and spreading light to everybody else, to really give people pride and say, I'm not scared of anything. And that kind of diminishes the anti-Semitism in its own way as well. I'll stop there and give Rabbi Stoller what
Yeah,
he
sure,
said.
cool. Yes, beautiful teaching about Jacob and Esau, and really a lot to think about there, Rabbi. Thank you. Some of what you said made me think of a couple of teachings that resonate with me in terms of anti-Semitism. So when you talked about, well, one is there's an excellent book written by a French philosopher, Jean-Paul Sartre, called Anti-Semite and Jew. And in that book, which is excellent, Sartre famously says, if the Jew did not exist, the anti-Semite would invent him.
Once in some titles, it's called Anti-Semitism without Jews.
Oh, okay, I haven't seen it.
Yeah.
But yeah, if the Jew did not exist, the anti-Semite would invent him, which, I find that to be very powerful for many reasons. One of which is Sartre's point is that anti-Semitism ultimately is not about Jews. It is about anti-Semites. And that those, like Rabbi Tenenbaum was talking about, the need, what's the ditch that the anti-Semite feels in their lives. They need to fill it, and they fill it by identifying the Jew as the source of their angst and emptiness. And they need an object, to focus on to help them do that. But ultimately, Sartre's thesis is that anti-Semitism is a psychological condition of the anti-Semite. It's not to do with Jews. So, and that's important because I think it's certainly very it's not uncommon for us in the Jewish community to ask ourselves the questions like, well, what have we done that's so bad that makes them hate us? And Sartre says the answer to that is nothing. It's not about us, it's about them. That's one thing that I thought of. And then secondly, in terms of, you cite the Talmud text about that it's a fact of life that there will be anti-Semites hating Jews. Theodor Herzl, who was the father of Zionism, he wrote, central to his project of Zionism and seeking to establish a Jewish state, was Herzl said that wherever the Jew goes, anti-Semitism will follow him, will be there. And he said that very much like Rabbi Tenenbaum was saying, it is a law of life in the world. And the only solution to what he even called, and then was later appropriated by Nazis and so forth, but what he called the Jewish question was to establish a Jewish state. That's why he wanted one, was because that would be the only way for us to live, without anti-Semitism in our surrounding us all the time. So I thought of those couple of things I wanted to share. And then I wanted, for my opening kind of remarks, I wanted to share, I brought this, I'm going to come closer so you can see it in a second. This is a figurine. I brought this as kind of my text to share. And I'm sharing it from the standpoint of not anti-Semitism per se, but from the standpoint of what might be called philo-Semitism. Philo-Semitism is ostensibly the opposite of anti-Semitism. Philo-Semitism is, extreme love of Jews. Let me tell you why I say that and how this all ties in with anti-Semitism. So when I was in my final year of rabbinic school in 2008, I participated in a conference with Catholic seminary students and rabbinic students that met in Poland. And the topic of the seminar was post-Holocaust theology. We met in Poland, and we in the town of Lublin, which was the center of Jewish life, before the Holocaust. And we talked to a lot of people there. We heard speakers and so forth. People in this community who were they love Jews. Okay, they are enthralled with Jews, and we're so excited to talk with us and tell us about how much they honor Jews in their community. One thing that they remember they told us about they do is every year they have a parade some day of the year. I remember what it was. It's like a Jewish tribute parade, and the people dress up like Jews and walk through the streets in the parade. We went to a restaurant, a Jewish themed restaurant outside of Lublin, where they were playing klezmer music. They had pictures of Jews all over the walls. And here's the thing, in that community, there are no Jews. Right? They were all murdered in the Holocaust, right? And they don't live there anymore. There's no Jews. But these people anyway, and it seems like culturally it's present in the community, they have this love of Jews that's based on no real knowledge of Jews at all, only based on, what they know from history books and not any kind of real life experience. And they try to honor Jews that way. Well, and this was outside of Lublin, in one of these towns that we went to, they had a variety of different stores in the town square that sell tchotchkes and gifts and whatnot. And I found this guy here, right there. These figurines are all over the place where we were in Poland. I mean, tons and tons and tons of them. I'm going to come up so that you can see it a little close. So I bought one because I thought that it would be an amazing teaching tool. Let's see if you can see him. There he is. Okay, so this guy, they have just tons and tons of these figurines in these little stores where we were in Poland. And I asked, one of the salespeople of this, the store about it. What was this? And they said, "Oh, it's for good luck. They're for good luck." Well, you can see it. Look, it's a Jew, right? And I'm curious, you guys, if you can look at it, tell me, what do you see in this figurine? Remember, this is created, or at least these are sold in a community that on the one hand has this kind of philo-Semitism. They love Jews so much that they think these are good luck, but they have no real living Jews anywhere around them. What do you see here? You guys are, it looks like some of you are talking, but you're on mute.
Can I see it for a second?
You might want to put your screen on speaker view and you'll get a bigger shot of it.
This is amazing.
Who holds it up there?
Oh, my God.
Yeah, here, I'll show over here.
He's got money in his hand.
Okay, you see he's got a coin a gold coin in his hand.
And he's obviously a suitcase, he's traveling.
He's got a suitcase. Okay, so it indicates he's traveling. What else do you see?
Prayer shawl.
Yeah, he's got his prayer shawl, his talit katan underneath his coat.
Definitely kind of a rootless guy.
Okay, why do you say that?
Well, with the case and, and he's kind of clearly like he's got destinations, he's got people to see.
Uh-huh.
He's in commerce with the gold coin.
Uh-huh. Yeah, he's one. You've ever heard of the idea of the wandering
Sure.
Jew?
Wandering Jew.
Right? Where does that come from? The wandering Jew. What is that about?
Well, that has to do with Jews not accepting salvation.
people not accepting Jews.
Well, Jews have, were kicked out of lots of different countries, so never really had a permanent home. They're kind of wandering around with the suitcase. So he's got a suitcase and he's got money in his hand. I wonder if you can see his face. What do you see in his face?
So
Prominent nose. They have a stereotype of this, is what they've done. They've taken probably every more negative stereotypes of Jews and made it into a statue.
Uh-huh. So, all right, so what else besides the wandering Jew and the money? What else are stereotypical?
Well, his nose is prominent there.
Uh-huh.
The beard,
Uh-huh.
the hat. To them, this is probably what all Jews look like.
Uh-huh. And look at his eyes. Can you see what you see in his eyes?
From here, it looks like only one is open, but that could
Yeah.
be just the angle. So I only saw the one pupil on its left eye,
Yeah.
or right eye. Guess it depends if it's mirroring one.
Yeah, kind of hollow,
Not a happy face.
not a happy face.
Hmm.
Yeah, I'm gonna come and just sit away.
Why is one eye hollow and one eye
I
showing
don't know.
as a regular eye? Are all the statues like that with the eyes
No, I
like
don't
that?
know. I don't know. I thought that this was interesting. I thought that, we could learn from it. It serves as a text of kind. But, there are this whole kind of tapestry of stereotypes and images of Jews that are out there. In this community in Poland, they all happen to be crystallized, like someone said on the screen. They're kind of crystallized in time because Jews don't live there anymore. So it's the whole image is just kind of come together in this, in the figurines and in the way people dress up in costumes. But it certainly captures, some of the tropes about Jews that have taken shape over the course of centuries and centuries and centuries.
Is that a glass in his eye, like to examine jewels or something?
Yeah, I don't know.
Because it's like, you figure if someone's looking at a diamond very closely, they would have something in their eye.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know.
Coin merchant.
Coin merchant. I don't know. So it just tells us, I just find it so interesting. So I just wanted to introduce this as like a way of launching, some conversation about anti-Semitism. So I guess I'll stop my remarks there and.
It's not negative in and of itself, that what they're doing. I mean, it's not automatically negative what they've done. Wouldn't you say? I mean, I don't see it as negative per se. It's how you look at it. I mean, how someone then, depending on how people interpret it. But I know I did a thesis on a philo-Semite, a French philo-Semite named Charles Péguy. And he was a big fan of the Jews. He was a French mystical Catholic, and he loved the Jewish people. And one of the things he loved about them was the fact that they honored their tradition and they had roots in their own way, deep roots in the past. And he thought the French should imitate that. But one of the things he brought up was in business, he said he had encountered several people who cheated him in his life. And then after each story, he wrote this phrase, "Quel n'était pas dit s'il était juif?" What would not have been said had those people been Jewish? And each one, it was a non-Jew, but he said, look at each one of them would have been seen as an awful Jew if they had done what they did to him financially. And so his point was, you get people who are a recognizable minority, they remember anything that's done by one of them, that's done by all of them.
Yeah, thank you. Good comments. So what thoughts, questions you guys have out there?
Mark, are there any questions in the chat box? Any comments?
we got one. Let's see what we got here.
See, I'll read the hat suitcase.
About it there.
Uh, um,
If you are interested in asking a question for right now, unless it gets really hectic, just unmic yourself, go ahead and ask.
I have a comment.
Steve, tell you who you are.
Steve Rikus. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
All right. I maintain that anti-Semitism is the world's oldest, most entrenched, most virulent prejudice. And I don't think why there is anti-Semitism is there are no easy answers for that. Sure, people have been fighting each other all over the world for centuries. The Highlanders versus the Lowlanders, the French speaking versus the German speaking, this, that, you name it. There's one group against another. But none of that ever reaches the level and depth and permanence of anti-Semitism. So I take a little different view of the book of Esther and the story that the rabbi told. It doesn't differ that much maybe, but it's this. The book of Esther begins with a description of the Persian Empire, 127 provinces from Ethiopia to India. So everybody is different in the Persian Empire, different races, different religions, different everything, languages. So when Haman sees Ahasuerus, he said, Ahasuerus said, why do you want to get rid of these people? His answer is, because they're different. Well, how does that make any sense if everybody in the Persian Empire is different? So I oppose that. Isn't there something very special and very odd about anti-Semitism as opposed to any other, hatred and prejudice and so forth?
Rabbi? Well, I think, Steve, in your comment about Haman in the book of Esther, I think you're right, but you're missing a nuance of what Haman says. He says, not only are the Jews are different, he says, but they follow their own laws. They don't follow the king's laws. And that is that's an ancient, obviously from book of Esther, that is an ancient trope about Jews that suggests that it's not only that we're different, but that we're not loyal to the country in which we live. We hear that even now in these days, and it suggests that Jews have hostility and animosity toward people who are not Jews. And in this this text of the Targum Esther, which is a rabbinic kind of interpretation of the book of Esther, I just want to share quickly some of this is how the rabbi, the sages who wrote this, reflecting back anti-Semitic, their understanding of non-Jewish perceptions of Jews in their time. So I'll just read aloud kind of what they say when they're interpreting Haman's statement to the king. And this is how the words they put in Haman's mouth. This people, the Jews, are arrogant. When they see us, they spit on the ground and they see us as impure. They do not give their daughters to us in marriage, and they will not marry our daughters. The days on which we want to buy from them, they declare to be forbidden to engage in commerce with us. 1 in 7 days they rest and enter into their synagogues to read from their sacred books and curse our king. After 8 days, they circumcise their sons' foreskins, taking no pity on them. And they say, this is so that we will be different from the people of other nations. On the day they call Pesach, they go to their synagogues and read from their sacred books and say, Just as we burn the leaven and eat matzah, so too shall the wicked kingdom among us be burned. And so too will God redeem us from this foolish king. When they had their own kingdom, they had a king named David, and he planned evil designs against us and wanted to destroy us and wipe us off the face of the earth. Whatever they sell at exploitative prices, but everything they buy, they seek to pay only what it is worth. This is how the ancient sages, the Jewish rabbis who wrote the Targum Esther, this is how what they were hearing in their own time of non-Jews saying about them. And these things that are said, these are common, tropes even today. To Rabbi Tenenbaum's point, this is how far back this goes. This is the ancient world.
Thanks for reading that. That was very good. I mean, interesting. I think there's a lot of truth to it.
Well, I was going to point on one thing is, I think that Steve mentioned was that what's so special about anti-Semitism, the hatred of anti-Semitism, there's another point to look at it is that the idea that Jewish people have been around so long, not really any other nation still exists from the ancient times. So the fact that anti-Semitism still exists, sure, people hate each other, that every group hates the other group, that's pretty common. United Nations and all that, even notwithstanding. At the end of the day, we're the one constant from the beginning till now where we could be hated upon. And like people are mentioning, we're a minority and all that. But it goes back to the point where it's something that exists, and it's something that the same theories and the same things are being said. I don't think there's a lot we can change about it. And I think the perspective really is to go along with our lives. Let's do positive things, not necessarily to change the perspective of people around us, but just to be the best us that we can be, and not worry about it as much as some people do.
Sometimes, like the Nazis would take things that were true and tell them to their children, but make it sound bad. Like, for example, they would ask their children, look at a picture, and they would show pictures of a hunter. And they would say, notice that you don't find Jews hunting. And they would make that an equivalent to lacking in courage, lacking in exploratory abilities. And instead of just the fact that kosher laws, had made all the difference. Or they would say, there aren't as many great Jewish artists as the Greeks, ancient Greeks and Romans, without looking at the issue of idolatry. And so they would take these things that have elements of truth and would say, oh, but see, this means that Z, and that's a very different picture.
Any other questions or comments?
It's funny, in fact, when I asked my students about that, I gave them the English translations of what the Nazis were teaching. And to their credit, they all said, well, that's not true what they're saying of the Jews, and I said, but actually what they're saying, isn't it interesting? It is true. And they said, what? Mr. Gendler, how can you say that? I said, but they're taking it in a very negative sense. And when I explained it to them, but yeah.
Yeah. Certain things, well, I think in what I read from Targum Esther, there are certain things that are highlighted there that are not untrue. It's just about it's about the interpretation of the thing, right? And that enemies of the Jews have chosen for their own psychological reasons and whatnot to construct this image of Jews based on some of these things that they paint a picture of Jews as hating people who are different from us, and as wanting to cause them harm and such. Some of the things that that you heard in there.
Don't you think it's difficult to do physical harm to people who you don't perceive as being harmful to you or facing or potentially harmful to you? It might be based on economy or politics, but for the people to raise armies to hate another people, to go to war against them. They need some moral issue to get the blood boiling, and I hate you because you're Viet Cong, or I hate you because you're an Afghanistani, or you're this or they're that. And I like what you said, that it's so ancient, it goes so far back in time without changing. So it's the ditch. I like that ditch, and the mound really simplifies it in my mind and clarifies. I have a mound and you want it. You need it because I'm lacking in that spiritual connection with something bigger and higher than myself. And I just cannot connect with a higher power. They can't.
Well, sometimes a lot of it's oral tradition too. People get it, it gets passed on.
Oh, generation.
In high school, a guy just came up to me, someone told him I was Jewish. He just came up right up to me, and spit in my face,
Oh,
and then started swearing, you effing Hebrew.
how long ago was this?
So I was in the 10th grade, so it was about 200 years ago.
Same time as the Sylvester.
So it's about 50 years ago, maybe, and 60 years ago. And so we ended up getting in a fight, and I let it go. I didn't tell anybody about it, but it was really made an impression on me.
Yeah.
Because it's just, someone told him that Jews are bad, and that's it, period.
I'm Native American, so a lot of what you've described as aspects of our situation living in America, in the Americas, not just the USA, but this hemisphere. We're okay now because we're depleted in number. We don't pose a threat, except when we want to build a casino and make money, or buy land, or expand our influence in a community. And then it's, we're just a bunch of drunken, ignorant, low down people. And we're just inferior because of
I
that.
thought you had casinos. Don't you?
Oh, yes, we do, but it's
Now
very,
they do.
but it's a hassle to not only get the casino built, but to operate it independently. My brother was president of the Coalition of Energy Resource Tribes, both from Canada, America, and Mexico, for the exploitation of coal, uranium, and other energy producing things, which before the federal government would say, Peabody coal, you need coal, go on the Ute reservation and start digging. And of course, the Utes got no money from that, or no resources out of that until more recently. But that stereotype of when I tell them I'm Native American, do you live in a teepee? That, I'm stuck in time from another period of history. So that's another issue. And
Yeah,
being spit
that's like
at
this
and
guy.
made fun of as a child, yes.
That's exactly like this guy. Actually, like my experience in Poland that I was describing made me see it had a lot of resonance for me with respect to Native Americans and the role that Native Americans play in American consciousness. It struck me as very similar because, for many, if not most Americans, we don't really know Native Americans. They live on, as far as most people, I think where you consider is like they live on reservations, like we don't know. The image that we have is crystallized from like a long time ago. And you find it in, these conversations now about the sports teams and stuff with the, Chief Wahoo with the feather and all that. And I think it's done just like the Philo-Semites in Poland, it's done with it's good intention. And this is like, oh, this is great. Like, we love these images. We love Chief Wahoo. And it's so friendly and we're not meaning any disrespect. In fact, we're honoring, the legacy, but it's that kind of Philo-Semitism or Philo-Native Americanism that can actually manifest as anti-Semitism because it's a dehumanization of of living people into just a stereotypical kind of figurine like this. So it just made me think of that. and how we do in our country, vis-a-vis the Native Americans.
Is there a comment to put into the conversation?
Just a minute.
I was trying to, hello,
Go ahead.
you can hear me?
Yes, we hear you, Steve. Go ahead.
Okay. There is prejudice and there's prejudice. There's lots of prejudice, lots of hurtful, harmful prejudice in the world. But I was questioning why anti-Semitism, among all the hatreds and prejudices of the world, is so virulent and so virulent over time. And that to me is a legitimate puzzle. I raise that question because I think, as I said, there's lots of prejudice, lots of evil in the world, but none has ever gone to the depths and permanence of anti-Semitism. And we have to ask why. Then I'll throw in a little bit of something else to lighten it up maybe. And what Rabbi Kripke used to say. He said, the commissar in the Kremlin knows two things about religion. The first thing he knows is that Jesus never lived, he never existed. And the second thing he knows about religion is the Jews killed him.
That way.
The Jews killed him.
Killed the one who never existed.
I think the why on anti-Semitism partly is because humans are lazy. Way back when it was started and all these tropes were created, put in a box, carried forward generation to generation. You don't have to create anything new. You just have to slap on a little paint to make it all pretty for today. But the core of it, we don't have to create anything new. So it's easy in a sense. And we don't have to, it's something, peoples are raised with. It's easy to do, easy packaged, and yeah. And as Jews go into different communities, it just gets carried along.
Thank you, Karen.
This is Alan Hirsch.
So let's let Alan.
I'm sorry.
go ahead. Yeah.
Hi,
Alan, go
thank
ahead.
you, rabbis. Yeah, if you can hear us, it's Alan and Donna in Lincoln. I was wondering if you could comment on the biblical roots of anti-Semitism, and especially as regards the other Semites, the Arabs, who I believe their hatred goes back to Abraham's sons. And maybe you could comment on that.
So we definitely touched upon the biblical sources for anti-Semitism. We mentioned how anti-Semitism really started, and we mentioned Yaakov and Esav, Jacob and his brother Esau. But if you really want to look at it, it even goes a little bit further back than that. One of the classical examples of anti-Semitism is Laban hating Jacob and trying to swindle and cheat Jacob. So it goes even further back than that. Not much further. It's only like 20 years difference, but it's from the beginning, really from when the Jewish people became a nation. If you look at the giving of the Torah, when the Jewish people are wandering through the desert, the first people that come to meet them are the Amalekites who want to kill the Jewish people. They had nothing to fear. Everybody knew that the Jewish people weren't going into their part of the land. They weren't going to conquer the Amalekite nation, but they came to fight the Jews. And they came to try to destroy them. There's a lot written about that specific hatred of the Amalekites. That's where Haman comes from, etc. So it's really, and this is right after the Jewish people leave Egypt and the Jewish people get the Torah. Right away, the Amalekites come and they want to mess around. They want to fight. So it's there from the beginning. It's there, and specifically about the Arab nations. The hate is not there necessarily from the beginning, and it's interesting to note. The persecution from the Arab nations actually is not that consistent, if you think about it. An interesting note that you see from the Rambam Maimonides, he writes that he actually has a lot of terrible things to write about the Arab nations, And he's actually kind of an outsider in that sense from his time. He lived about 1,500 years ago or so. And he was one of the only people that were actually persecuted by the Arabs at the time. There were different sects of Arabs, and depending who was in control. But most of the Sephardic Jews that lived under Arab control actually lived pretty peaceful and prosperous lives. On the other hand, the Eastern European Jews were constantly being persecuted, starting with what's known as the Tachvatat pogroms of about 1,000 years ago, continuing with the pogroms that were set off by Shabtai Tzvi, and going on to the Cossacks, and obviously onto the Holocaust and communism. What that did was no fun and games either. So generally, the Christian nations were the ones that were persecuting the Jews in the last 1,000 years, and the Arabs weren't, with a few highlights of where they did. But lately, it's been the Arabic nations that have been pretty against us. So they're a little late to the party, maybe. They just realized that we're a problem. I don't know.
Israel, of course.
And they blame it on Israel. It's not just Israel. And if you read the charters of Hamas and some of the other groups there, they don't say anything about Israel per se. They just say every Jew into the sea. Like they're non-discriminate. They don't care if you live in Israel or not. They don't care where you are. They hate Jews.
Yeah.
Hamas's charter is quite frightening if you take a look at it. And I mean, the U.S. looks at Hamas as a terrorist organization, and I think that that's a correct label on them. Let's keep in mind that they were elected by the people of the Gaza Strip, I believe, whatever section that they're in there. So it's a little concerning, but at the end of the day, yes, that's anti-Semitism today. They put it onto Israel. They definitely apply it to Israel, but it's really, they don't just suffice it with Israel. But I think the more important thing is and I think I've mentioned this a few times, if you're living in Israel and if you're living and if you're experiencing anti-Semitism, obviously we can do what we can. We mentioned the 3 approaches that we can have towards it. Obviously, trust in God. And then after that, there is diplomacy. And diplomacy, someone mentioned previously, I think it was mentioned here, the idea of that it's passed on generation to generation. If you want to try diplomacy and you want to try reasoning, it will or would not work. It may work, it may not work, but you definitely start from the top. You don't discuss and you don't negotiate, so to speak, with the masses, because you're not going to get anywhere with them. They're not going to listen. They're listening to their higher ups. And also, it has to be done in a peaceful way. The negotiations and the diplomacy have to be done. Protests. I know the Lubavitcher Rabbi, who lived in Crown Heights and lived in Brooklyn many years ago, who we were great followers of his, and he's the leader of the Chabad movement. He hated anti-communist protests. He said it didn't help anything. The same thing was with a specific story with the general or the prime minister or whatever the leader of France was at the time after Chagall, who was considered an anti-Semite. He didn't want to sell arms to Israel. It was a whole back and forth. And there were protests. When he came to America, there were protests, loud and strong protests against him. And when that happened, he stopped selling even the small arms to Israel. Once the protest stopped, he restarted. So he may have been an anti-Semite, but the anti-Semites get more encouraged when you yell at them. So definitely talking to them in a peaceful way, it might help, it might not help. But also, having an IDF is a very nice thing.
Well,
And
that's what I wanted to, I think you made a very important point when you talked about how extreme the Hamas doctrine is,
Right.
because I think a lot of people overlook it because of, thank God, the relative lack of power Hamas has compared to what Nazi Germany had. I mean, if, God forbid, Hamas had the power that Nazi Germany had in 1939, we'd be looking at a very different thing. And I think that's a very crucial element here, is that unfortunately, horribly, with Nazi Germany, you had that virulence, but combined with a very powerful nation state. The most powerful nation state in Europe.
And on that note, you take a look at Iran and Syria today, and Iran is a scary place in that way. Who knows what Israel attacked and destroyed their nuclear reactors in the 80s, secret mission that was, they didn't tell America about it, and that was a good thing because America would have stopped them. But the IDF this is the counterpoint to Hamas. IDF doesn't say that they're there to protect the land of Israel. The IDF is in, I think I don't know what document they have about their founding. The IDF is to protect the Jewish people. And that's a very important point, that it's about, sure, anti-Semitism now is framed in anti-Israel sentiment, but we have, we have backup in that way, and hopefully the Israeli government would see the same way. Sometimes they're not exactly as on the same page as everybody else should be. But that's, again, the three-pronged approach of trusting in God and doing diplomacy as much as you can, and being prepared for war. And hopefully God has it set up where we don't need the diplomacy or the battle or the fight.
Question, what about anti-Semitism in our country now? Our country? What about the people who said, marched with Nazi swastika flags through Charlottesville saying, the Jews will not replace us? That's this country, and it's now.
That's exactly right. And I will also say that right now, at this moment, and here in Omaha, we at Temple Israel, we have one of our teens is in the midst of very aggressive anti-Semitic bullying at her high school, at Elkhorn South High School. The ADL thankfully is very much on top of the situation and working with the school administration, which is also being very helpful and proactive, in trying to address it. But this is a high school, I want to say sophomore or freshman, whose classmates, are some of the stuff that we read in the Targum Esther, they're saying this to her in her classroom. And I've been in communication with the family, and it blows me away.
They're staying anti-Semitic in the classroom.
Yes.
Is the teacher there?
Yeah, I mean, they're doing, how they do, I guess, passing notes or,
Like, what are they saying to her?
I'll look it up. I have some notes here, but so some of these, things about they're making comments about the saying like Heil Hitler and Nazi, the Nazis, should have finished the job, that kind of thing. I mean, just really horrible stuff.
That's horrible.
And it blows me away that, that teenagers are doing this. I mean, right here in Omaha, it's sickening.
Yeah, but we
So,
had a president who said that we had a president that said there were good people on both sides. You know any good person with a Nazi swastika and said the Jews shall not replace us?
Now that's just not true. Trump didn't mean that there were good people on the pro-Nazi side. He just meant there were people when they march, you have people marching from all kinds of different views. He was just trying to say you had people who are good on both sides. He didn't mean, yes, the Nazis are good. No, that was not Trump.
And let's don't let the points are well taken, but let's not drift into the political part of all that.
I agree.
With that.
Yeah.
And this is Mark Kirchhoff speaking, by the way. We were prompted from the people on the screen that especially if we're off campus, to identify ourselves by name. I did have one thing I wanted to mention, and that is the question of why. I mean, we seem to ask the question why so many times about all this, and that the question why is a torturous question. And if you don't believe me, just try to get a 2-year-old child to do something, and you'll get why right down the line. But beyond that, I'm not sure that if we ever get that question answered, it's going to make any difference about what behavior takes place. And that's why I like what Rabbi Tenenbaum says all the time about some practical things to confront the situation at hand. Whether you know why or not, you know that you got something in front of you.
And pay attention to where the power is. Or if you've got nation states behind it, or if you've got large groups, that's especially a problem. Thank God in this country, at least, the neo-Nazis, these wackos are still, I think, Kevin's a fairly small number and are not in power.
I would love to hear from some other participants on Zoom. We've heard from Steve. and Alan. There's a bunch of you guys on here. What else are you thinking? Okay, I would say Vicky is giving a comment. I don't.
Yeah, you can open up the,
Up in the chat. Okay, so we see Eileen said, my son experienced anti-Semitism in Elkhorn South when he was there. It just made him want to be proud to be Jewish.
I like that.
Yeah,
That's good.
yeah.
Because we did touch on the why, at least a little bit, to some extent. We touched on it in the sense of the mound and the ditch. And there, people see us and they see that we have meaning, and they're kind of jealous of that. And one of the ways to kind of combat that, you would say, is to share meaning with other people. Let people know that there's a way for everybody to just be involved and do good things and just make the world a better place. And if people have meaning in their own lives, a lot of the people you find to be anti-Semitic, I would imagine, and you can kind of look and see, are missing real meaning in their own lives. They don't have, real things going on. They're bored, in a way, and it's a kind of a jealousy in some way, and being proud to be Jewish and just saying, I'm proud to be Jewish and my heritage is very important and I do good things. I do mitzvot and I try to light up the world, and you can try to do the same in your way. Everybody can do it however they like. That's a great way to combat it. Just give people a message of sharing light, sharing goodness, sharing good deeds, good things.
Good
I
section.
see Vicky said, I don't feel teachers are trained to handle this unless they have had specific professional development on how to handle this.
My wife and I were actually approached by a parent of West Side, is it middle school or high school? High school, and there was some anti-Semitism going on there. I believe there was a national news story where one of the teachers wrote a quote from Hitler on the board. And I know the ADL was involved, but there is a lot of red tape and bureaucracy. We tried, we had a lesson kind of planned, Jewish pride, which is very appropriate for what was written up there. We wanted to kind of share a concept of the ADL does good stuff, but there's a little bit in our mind, a little bit too much focus on the Holocaust and negativity, but something more about Jewish pride. But there was a lot of red tape and bureaucracy through the high school that everything takes, there's anti-Semitism today, but we're going to deal with it in 6 months after it goes through all of these things, and we'll have a class and all the teachers will be trained, and then the teachers can speak to the students. It's just the world we live in today where everything has to be, triple checked, and I don't know what we can do about that. I wish, but I mean, I'm sure your son had his Jewish pride came from his home, where his parents kind of gave him that pride. I think that's kind of our responsibility. Give your children, your grandchildren, teach them the Jewish pride, and anti-Semitism comes their way. It's disheartening and it hurts, but step back up with pride. And I think that's kind of the like you're saying, the teachers are not trained. And until they get the training, and then they have to, get the correct training, and it has to be politically correct, who knows when the training will happen. But we can train our own children. And that's, I think, a very important job that we have. And we can definitely.
All right, well, it looks like it's 8 o'clock.
It's 8 o'clock.
So,
Good session.
yeah, thank you all for participating tonight. Thanks for a great conversation. And Rabbi,
I just do want to make just one more thing we talked about, and I'll emphasize it again, that next week, we likely will not be in this room because the room is going to be used by the Israeli delegation who's coming here. It was kind of a spontaneous thing that happened, as I understand it. So it will probably all be virtually on Zoom. Okay.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks, everybody. What's the topic next week? Do you have it?
The greatest hits of Pirkei Avot.
Yeah.
Is that what it is?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
What
excellent.
is it?
Pirkei Avot, greatest hits.
Greatest hits of Pirkei
Bring your
Avot.
greatest hit for Avot.
Oh, okay, well, okay.
Pirkei Avot.
Yeah, that's a good one.
All
Thank
right,
you all.
Thank you.
Greatest hits of Pirkei Avot, yeah.
And the meeting is ending. So thank you all. Have a good evening.
Thank